Thank you.
Okay, so that takes care of that. So we should be, yeah, we're recording.
Okay. Thank you for
Sure,
your availability again. And yeah, so Kenneth Feinstein is an artist, theorist, curator, and writer, working with experimental, sorry about the background sounds as well, working with experimental non-narrative video and film projects and photography. So I saw you have been a part of several artist residencies around the globe. And I wanted to ask, how have those travels influenced your practice?
That's an interesting question. It's influenced my practice in a lot of ways. I mean, I think that, excuse me, part of what's good about doing a residency is that you have to be open to whatever's before you and the people you encounter, and you have to, and hopefully you have to be inquisitive in terms, at least for me, you have to be inquisitive in terms of what is the environment that you're in and what is the reality of life for people there. And that's what I find interesting about going to residencies. Not all of the residencies have involved as direct access to other people as this one did, because in this one I sat down, I interviewed at least 15 people. But for example, when I was in Beijing, a lot of it was just sort of wandering around the city sort of on my own, trying to observe life, meeting people who, local people, expats, all sorts of people, sitting around talking to them, getting invited to people's homes and things like this to get a sense of what life is like. Even though the project, the final project, a short film, was about 10-15 minutes long, called Inside the Third Ring, was not, like I said, it wasn't directly with these people's input. I wasn't talking to people within the project, but the observations, but the ways that I understood what I could do and how I would approach it, and how to sort of approach looking at a place, at least trying to get a bit of an understanding of what people who live there think and feel about it, was fundamental to what I did.
So exactly this last one in Lisbon. So I went to the show in Carpintarias de São Lázaro, and that's where I saw the video installation of My House Is My Only Head in Blessed Rains. And I'm curious about this title. Can you tell me a bit of what it means to
yeah,
you?
well, it's kind of funny. Well, first off, I would love to say that I came up with that phrase, but I didn't. It's actually the title of a song by Captain Beefheart, Don Von Vliet, who, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was an avant-garde rock musician from the mid 60s to the mid 80s, when he quit and became a full-time painter. And I always liked that title because I thought it was about a sense of displacement, about a sense of, do you belong, do you not belong? I've been wanting to use this as, I've been looking for a project where this would be an appropriate title for quite a while, because I think that I guess really ever since I left my home country, and at a certain point after having left my home country, knew that I'm not in a situation where I have an immediate escape plan to go back to the country, so that I was more sort of in a situation closer to, let's say, my grandparents when they came to North America, knew that going back was not necessarily an option. Ever since that point, I think a title like that kind of explains a lot about sort of the immigrant process. You're never quite home here and you're never quite home there. And you carry a lot of what's new, and you carry a lot of what's old within you. And that's why I thought that was an appropriate title.
So particularly your video works, but particularly this series of My Head is my only house unless it rains. They're, as you were saying, they're very observational, especially the ones before this last one in Lisbon, which is more immersive with the people and creating a dialogue. I wanted to know, where did the exploration of our ambient and the way we act in it become an interest of yours? How did this relation of the ambient that surrounds us and the way we act in it became an interest of yours?
I mean, to a certain extent, I don't know if it hasn't always been there, but, and this is something about this project that I found very kind of interesting, is when I was an undergraduate, way back in the 20th century, I was actually training to be a documentary filmmaker. And of course, there are many different styles of documentary filmmaking. And what the school that I was at and what they were very much sort of enamored with and what I was trained in is what we call American direct cinema, which is, the work of, like, Ricky Leacock, Don Pennebaker, the Maisel brothers. And that's very much about sort of being very observational, following people and being very observational. So my original training in documentary filmmaking, even though I left documentary filmmaking, has always kind of had that idea to it, that you see the world and you try to find the truth that is within your observations, and hopefully cut your film, put your works together, however you want to describe it, collage, whatever you want to say. I guess I shouldn't say collage, montage accordingly, so that from the surface of things you can see what's behind it. And so I think that that's always kind of been there. It's just that up until this project, I haven't directly quoted the idea of documentary as much as I have here, because with the interviews and all that, it's going back to more of an immediate documentary structure. And I mean, it has elements of traditional documentary film within it in this piece, but it's always kind of been there. There's always been kind of this idea that we observe what's on the surface, hoping to find a way to get to what's behind it. What are the forces? What are the movements? What are the things that make things turn out the way that they are?
For sure. I was, when I saw that film piece, I immediately reflected on isolation and versus community, and related that to a modern day sense of the pre-pandemic, the pandemic times, and the post-pandemic times. Not exactly post, but a new reality that we're living. And I was wondering if that was a purpose of that exploration.
You mean particularly within this project or within the other projects?
I mean both. I'm referring particularly to this one, yes.
I mean, did you feel that this project was much more about isolation than the others?
I think not necessarily, but the observational sense to it.
The reason I'm asking is because I think that one of the things about the other films is, since there's a little bit of my voice in this piece every once in a while, but even though I, for the most part, try to keep it out of, I have particular individuals' voices within this work. And so you have people to identify with, where in the other works, you're observing things. There's definitely a directorial voice and an authorial voice in the other pieces, but it's never immediately visible. You have to sort of infer that. And here there's less of inferring that. So I thought in some ways this piece was more directly sort of giving people's feelings and giving people's observations. We had people to identify with. And I tried to make sure with these people that it wasn't just a litany of horror. It isn't like, oh, I've lived here and they've done this to me and they've done that to me and this is bad and that is bad and so on. But also I was hoping that within this, that you would also hear about things that did work, so that it was a very balanced and a very nuanced kind of understanding that you get of the place that you're in. And also very important for me was the way that it was. So the way that it was presented was, there was a bit of programming that had to go into this. And so I used a program called Max MSP, which I've used off and on since, I guess, the beginning of the century. I can use phrases like that. Since the beginning of the century. For about 20 years, I've been using Max, and the program's probably about 40 years old or more. And what that allowed me to do is that allowed me to randomize what got played as a way of trying to take out my editorial, again, taking my editorial voice out of that to a certain extent, because I feel the more that my editorial voice is there, and to a certain extent, it's always there in terms of, these are half-hour, 45-minute interviews. I've cut them up to, maybe 10, 11 at the most, 1 to 3 minute, actually half a minute to 3 minute clips. So there's a bit of a judgment there for me. So I don't feel it's a bit of an editorial voice. I mean, it's more of a judgment from me from what I thought was most interesting in terms of what they had to say. But it was very important to me that the subjects felt that I was properly representing what they had to say. And a lot of the subjects saw the completed work. At least one of them asked for all the edited pieces, and I had no problem sending that. Yeah, they did get the edited pieces. I had no problem with sending unedited, edited, whatever, everything that I have to the people who were involved. In other words, if I interviewed you, I would be happy to give you your material. I'm not going to give you someone else's material. I want to make sure the phrasing is clear that way. But I had no problem with that because I saw this as a collaboration. It's kind of, my name is on it, but there are a lot of people who are involved in it, and everyone who's interviewed is in it. Not just the people of Carpintarias, but also a few other people who helped introduce me to other people and so on. They're all part of the project in one way or another, and they're all equally important as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely, it's a way of giving and giving back. And
I mean, I'm not afraid of the idea of the authorial voice, but I think that also we're in an age where we need to think about the fact that it isn't just sort of that single heroic view of the artist as the one individual who understands things. That's central to what we do when we make things. And this is, using time-based media, using film, using audio, using things that where the technology also demands that other people work with you is good because it opens that up. And that's one of the things that I always found really interesting about filmmaking. So that, for example, if we talk about Peter Greenaway, well, some of the people he's worked with have since died, so it makes it a little bit more difficult. But when you look at the classic times of Peter Greenaway, you can say the film's a Peter Greenaway film, but you can't say that it's also not a Sacha Verne film because he was the cinematographer. You also can't say that Michael Nyman isn't fundamental to it because he's the composer. You can't say, this kind of thing. And I think that working this and keeping that in mind when you work, the name of the person, collective, individual, whatever, is not as important as everyone feeling that they are equally have a valid input into what the final product is.
Okay, exactly. So, still about the interviews. So you interview migrants in Lisbon, particularly in the neighborhood of Mouraria, and raise awareness, as you said, showing it's not isolating, but showing a sense of community and the good sides and obviously the struggles with the bureaucracy system, job opportunities, and how people live their lives in a different country and still carry their last home with them. And in terms of these themes like social adaptation, job opportunities, language, do you think these themes should be more talked about, or are there still barriers and stigmas nowadays related to those?
Oh, they obviously should always be talked about. They're important things. How you judge people in relation to accent, ability to speak language, even dress in terms of thinking where people are in terms of education or class or things like that. I think one of the people said they do not speak Portuguese very well, so they're treated as if they're uneducated, even though they're I think getting a master's degree. That whole idea of how all those things work and all the things that we use to judge people, to decide where they exist in relation to the society itself, in relation to culture, class, education in terms of how you speak to them and what behaviors we expect, all that. It's incredibly important. And the fact that we constantly make assumptions from things that we don't know, and that we make assumptions that are they're very much based on our own prejudices, our own ideas of not just race but class. I think class was a much stronger theme within this project than is immediately apparent, because a lot of times people were talking about things in relation to class, or the idea of nationhood. The idea of European identity was really interesting. There were a few people who were talking about Afro-European identity, and all these things are really kind of fascinating, but a lot of them do revolve around not just skin tone, but accent, language ability. What language do you speak? What is expected of you in terms of language? Those are all really, really fascinating issues. My biggest regret with this project was, if I could do this project over again, I would like to have sort of gone out of the way and found a dedicated translator for me, because there were a few times where we only have one person who's speaking in Portuguese, and it took a long time to get that done because we were I am very grateful to the people who did the translations for me, and I do not want to say anything negative about the work that they did, but the point is, they were doing work that was outside of what they normally could do, and it was demanding a lot from them, where if I had someone who was dedicated, I would have interviewed there were a few more people I was hoping to interview, who I wasn't able to. But also, there were a lot of people who said yes and changed their mind and either didn't show up or canceled interviews, things like that. I had one of my students here in Malaysia had contacted a Syrian refugee in Lisbon to see about doing it, and they had agreed, and then they changed their mind. So a lot of that also happened too.
And that's all part of
the process.
This interactive with people, working with people, collaboration.
But it was very interesting to be able to reach out to university students from all over the place. We got in contact with university student organizations, and that was a really interesting place to get people, because you're getting people who are still fairly young, who are a lot of people are very articulate. They were very articulate, and very enthusiastic to be part of it, but also were fairly recent immigrants, and they had sort of a perspective that wasn't necessarily vastly different than poorer people who came in. There's a similarity. They aren't wealthy people coming in, but they're people who happen to be getting an education.
Yes. How did that selection of people happen? How did you meet them, and how did you make
right?
Put in contact with this universities?
So a few people I met through a friend of mine, Sofia Costello, who she worked in, I knew her because she worked in Malaysia, and she's from Lisbon, and she works in climate adaptation. So I met some people through her, some people from her graduate program, her postgraduate program, and some people who she knew from growing up. And actually, it's very funny. One of the people who she introduced me to, who's second generation, this guy Fernando, one day with the installation, someone stopped and said to me, I went to high school with him. which was something I wasn't really expecting. But so she introduced me to a few people, and also when I met people, I asked them, do you have people who you can recommend? And we got a few people that way. Through the art center, through the residency and art center, the Carpintarias people, they had a couple of community centers who they were involved with. They were nice enough to go out and try to find the names of some of these student organizations and help me in terms of writing to them. We wrote emails together. They helped contact people. They did a lot. They did a lot. I can't say how, I can't say how much. I can't say that, what am I trying to say? They did a lot. I really appreciate everything that they did. That's what I'm trying to say. I can't thank them enough. That was the phrase I was looking for all that they did to help do that. And so they put us in touch. They put me in touch with people who they either knew or reached out to find. When I suggested student organizations, they went out and found out who they were, and they started doing that. And then when you have one person from one student organization, if they know people in other student organizations, they may recommend, say, the Angolan student organization, which was one of the people we interviewed. After that interview, if the guy from the Mozambique student organization reached out to him, he would say, yeah, it was a good thing. And so it so there's a bit of, I was snowballing, sort of a convenient sampling, as they say, that happened. And I'm sure if I had done this over 6 months, it would have been more and more and more people. But that's sort of how we were able to do it. And, and I'm very, very happy that the people who I interviewed were, recommended me to other people, so that we also reached out. We happened also for another part of this project that we're hoping to do in the future. We met with the people at Fabrica Machina, which is an artist space. It's a big studio space, and they do a lot of things. And they helped us make, and I met with the people there, and they helped us make some stencils for sort of what hopefully might be a second phase to My Head Is My Only House. And through them, I got to meet one of the people who I interviewed, and through her, I got to meet another person. And so it kind of builds like that. So that's what it was. I guess the biggest problem that we had with all of this is just we happened to be doing this in July and August, and a lot of people were on holiday. But even with that, a lot of people were willing to take to take a day, 2 days, or whatever it was, to come out and meet us and see what's going on and talk to me. And I'm very grateful to everyone who did.
What was the feedback of the participants of the project if they saw the final outcome? They
were actually really fascinated by it. I'm glad to say that no one felt that they were misrepresented in any sort of way. And there's a little bit of that there's some things about that I can explain in relation to documentary filmmaking. But no one felt misrepresented. What I found interesting is most of them who came, and when they went to see the thing, it wasn't they wanted to see what the project was. They weren't just interested in seeing themselves. And most of them stayed for a half an hour when they watched it. They would sit down and they would really want to watch it. They were really interested in what it was, and they were as fascinated as anyone else. I was really kind of pleasantly surprised that most people seem to take a long time, a half an hour or more, to watch the thing, to really get most of the people who came in seemed to be very absorbed with it. And the people who I did it with, everyone seemed to be very happy with it. No one's complained to anyone about anything. I've tried to very specifically make sure that people felt represented. I tried to make sure that if a person had an issue, I did have one person who, in one of the interviews, they were talking about someone else, a relative, and they wanted to make sure that references that made it possible for other people to identify them were taken out. So of course I took them out. So I tried to make sure that people understood that I had, respect for that I was respecting their wishes. And I think I made it clear to everyone that, they can see what I did. They want copies of things and so on. They were always, they were always free. They were always free to see what, to have whatever. That I was trying to be very open about it. I was trying to be very clear. And I think some of it also is found in that, and you don't necessarily see this in the interviews, because I try to take my voice out as much as possible. But as much as I can say there were interviews, there were conversations. And in the conversations, I was as willing to explain my experiences and the things that drove me to want to do this in the way that I did, so they understood my perspective, so that the conversation was more mutual. And one thing that one of the interviewees suggested, and I didn't do, but there's no reason in future versions, because I will be showing this in Malaysia, and we will be showing this back in Carpintarias next year. And I may be able to show it in Germany and Indonesia in the future, is maybe taking some of the things that I have to say and put those together and make myself a 16th or 17th voice.
Okay.
That was suggested by one of the people too, which is not a bad suggestion. I found that really interesting, but I really enjoyed it, because I just sat down, I got to have conversations with a bunch of people. And I learned a lot by just being able to talk to these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoyed it.
And it's giving stage to how we learn from people on a daily basis, giving stage to that and putting that out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny, because even as a teacher, I mean, I'm kind of lucky right now because I'm teaching in postgraduate for almost entirely. I've moved away from lectures, and I like to do what we call symposium, what is referred to as a symposium, and a symposium is a dialogue. I mean, I always feel like much more is always learned from a dialogue than from anyone else lecturing to anyone else. I don't need to tell you what you need to know. I need to get, I need to think about things. You need to think about things. Conversation is the place where ideas start to get put together. And so anything that can be built around dialogue, I always feel is very positive.
I have a final question. Sure. About what would be your advice for young artists seeking to work with this documental research-based artworks related to society and this creation of dialogue? Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of like what I've been saying. The main thing is to be open to people, be willing to understand that it's collaborative, that the people you're talking to are equally creators in the work. Find ways, everyone needs to find their own way of doing what they need to do. And I think one of the things, if we're going to talk about a new generation of artists, I think that a lot of this is kind of embedded in a lot of what people are thinking. I think that the idea has to be, that the idea that it isn't, that I'm the genius and I understand what it is, and you are lucky enough to collaborate with me. I find sometimes I think that people have to think about do we even need to bother to, if we're making collaborative work, is the idea and the importance of what we find within the art world so important to do. Mm-hmm. I've known people who have done some fabulous projects going into communities and talking to people and all that. But when you walk out and say it's my project and start wanting to show it at museums and stuff, the question is, do you start to negate the goodness of the work that you do? I think that you need to always keep in mind, is the final output something that reflects whatever it is that goes into the making? If the making is very collaborative, there has to be something that reflects that within the output itself. And that's why I was trying to make sure that the things were randomly played to reflect sort of that a different kind of way of doing things, and a way of allowing the audience to be participatory too. Mm-hmm. And questioning what is the role of the audience, so that how they experience things will be very fundamental to what you do. This is one of the things that I find really, we're at an interesting place, and there are a lot of issues that are happening within the art world. But one of the things that I am finding very interesting is that a new generation of artists, a lot of them are already thinking this way. So I don't know if I have a lot of advice to give them as much as I want their advice. I want them to teach me what I need to know. But I think that's a very important part of the culture as it's developing today.
Thank you.
Sure, sure.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing your, maybe the continuation of My Head is My Only House Unless It Rains, or new projects.
Yeah. Well, the next is the next part is the moss thing. So I just have to find out from the people over there how that's going.
Oh, okay.
And then what we're hoping to do is take as many quotes as we can find from that we think are relevant from the interviews, and make stencils from them and grow them as moss instead of graffiti, and sort of grow them all over the neighborhood, and then of course take pictures of it and compile it that way, and kind of build a book or whatever from that, but kind of allow it to be something that grows and changes and eventually disappears too, right? Because if it really grows properly as moss, at some point it will be legible, at some point it will be illegible, and the importance of it being illegible is as important as it being legible.
And yeah, that's very interesting, because that's even more direct way of interacting with the audience.
Yeah, and back into the community, and making it something, because it's also interesting too, because it becomes something that we encounter, and we randomly encounter, and we encounter just if you go here. I mean, if I put 50 of them up and made a map and gave you a map, yes, you could go hunt it, but the majority of people who would see it would be someone, oh, I'm going to get my hair cut, I turn a corner and there's this thing growing on the wall that says, you know, a racist is someone who doesn't know history. Or I see 15 on the subway, I see 15 different shades of brown and it makes me happy. And now you're sort of confronting ideas in a different way, and that randomness of it, I think, is really kind of interesting, and something interesting in terms of putting things back into the community that hopefully are thoughtful and provocative to the community. Again, without trying to, be the same as an essay,
Making people question this things, which is very important.
So yeah, I mean, I'd like to know more about what you're doing. I mean, tell me more about what about you and what you're doing and all of this.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to start, but I'm studying painting. I'm doing a lot of different things and trying to find where I want to take my work. And I'm studying painting in undergraduate in London. So I was living in Lisbon, and I grew up in Lisbon, and then I moved there 2 years ago.
So you grew up in Lisbon?
Yes.
Okay. And which school in London?
Camberwell.
Oh, great.
And
that's the Camberwell College of Printing, right?
The Camberwell College of Arts.
Of Arts, okay. I guess it used to be but it has it used to be a printing school, right?
Yes, it has one of the oldest printing workshops, yes.
Right, I think that's where Neville Brody started. He was a student there.
I think so, yes, yeah. I think so. And so I'm doing painting mainly, but then especially last year I started taking the film photography that I used to do onto a more documental side. And then I started being interested in more research-based artworks. So it kind of been consuming more documentaries. So everything was being influencing my painting and my work. So I just started seeing painting as a reflection of these thoughts and society and my view on it. But then I wanted to explore more the actual documental side and have almost an in-field studying of getting to know the things from the people's perspective. So I started doing very casual interviews, sort of conversations, some with friends of friends, people who I would meet out in a pub or somewhere, or then that I would contact, that were migrants from all around the world. Especially in university, I had the chance of meeting a lot of people with different cultures and learn a lot from them. So I started exploring that, and that was going to lead me to a documental book project, and simply to inform my work as well as an aspiring painter. So yeah, but I'm more and more interested in this kind of documenting and knowing how to interview people, and how to take that knowledge onto the artwork itself. So that's what I'm still very much in process. Yes.
I mean, what I found interesting with interviewing people was I set up a bunch of questions as sort of a standard towards, well, these are the things I need to cover. And they changed a little bit as I talked to people, and people have suggested things that got taken into them. But the more I interviewed them and the more comfortable I was with knowing what I was trying to talk about, the less I needed to even ask the questions, and the more that we got straight into a conversation, which was even better.